Greetings, everyone. Peace to you all. Welcome to another episode of Praiseworthy Reviews, where we go through video games to see if they're excellent and commendable. Today, we will be reviewing StarVaders, a turn-based tactical roguelike deck builder by developer Pengonauts. As you might guess from the name, players play as different heroes defending Earth against invaders from the stars in Slay the Spire meets Into the Breach type of gameplay. As usual, we'll be evaluating the game based on 5 criteria: fun factor, educational value, cultural value, spiritual value, and cost. For context, prior to this review, I have finished the game to the credits. So without further ado, let's jump in. Like most roguelike deck builders, the core gameplay of StarVaders consists of 3 main aspects: the core turn-based combat, deck building, and the overall roguelike progression. Players begin by selecting a mech, gunner, stinger, or keeper. The gunner is a mech that uses mostly projectile weapons, known in the game as bullets. Stingers focus on moving around the board and striking enemies adjacent to them in a more melee samurai type of fashion. Finally, keepers don't just use one mech, but focus on summons that can be sacrificed to fight invaders. Each mech has at least 3 pilots, with slightly different decks and starting artifacts that makes the mech feel quite different, kind of like subclasses. In the hardest difficulty, players move through 3 acts, each with 3 encounters, a shop, and a boss. For each encounter, you can choose encounters based on enemy types and rewards, although honestly I mostly focus on choosing rewards. Once you begin an encounter, your goal is simply to eliminate all the enemy invaders. However, the more enemies you can kill on a single turn, the better your combo score and stars. Also, once you gain 5 doom, you lose the game, so it's best to finish encounters by gaining as little doom as possible. Combat is basically a combination of using cards from deck builders combined with some turn-based tactical grid combat. Cards are quite interesting, enemy variety is pretty solid, and I liked how they made grid movement important. The mini-bosses and bosses of the game are quite enjoyable and very different from the regular enemies, with many of them requiring the player to defeat them in multiple stages. Essentially, the bosses are thematic, creative, and quite fun to play against. Progression throughout the run is similar to most roguelikes, improving your deck. You can improve your deck through gaining new cards, removing cards you don't want, upgrading cards, and gaining artifacts, which are like passive abilities. These rewards can be gained through encounters or the shop, although removing cards can only be done at the shop. The meta progression for the game also feels quite good, with the game having good scaffolding and helping the player ease into more complex aspects of the combat. Players gain XP for playing as each mech, which unlocks cards. One thing I really liked about the game is how cards are unlocked in synergistic batches, which avoids the problem that many roguelikes have where unlocking cards sometimes dilutes the pool and makes runs more inconsistent. The other thing the game does to make runs more consistent is to give chrono tokens, which allow the player to reroll any random element, available encounters, available rewards, shop items, or even rewind a turn. Each run is incredibly entertaining, and I had a blast trying out all different kinds of builds. There was never a dull moment, so overall I'm going to give the game 5 stars for fun factor. As a turn-based roguelike deck builder with essentially no real-time elements, motor skills are obviously not particularly important in StarVaders. There's also no factual or conceptual knowledge to be learned in the game. Despite this, I found the game to have quite a bit of strategic depth in almost all choices you make in the game. Which cards to play, where to move, who to attack, the order to do these sequences, even the special abilities of summons, deciding what cards to add to your deck, what cards to remove, and when to use your precious chrono tokens also has significant implications in the way decks are built, and the choices available to the player later on. The one criticism I have with the game, in terms of its educational value, is that once you understand the mechanics of the game well, the base game is actually not as challenging as I would hope, although there are definitely ways to up the challenge. Overall, I'm going to give the game 5 stars for educational value. As far as the artistic value of StarVaders is concerned, I really like its visual identity. The art has a brightly colored palette for menu and story elements. Cards look great and are easily distinguishable. The on-grid sprites are less exciting, but they're still cute and there's little to complain about. Animations are rather stylish, and the interface makes every choice clear and easy to understand. There are 1 or 2 catchy songs in the soundtrack, but honestly, the soundtrack is not especially good or bad. As you might expect, there is no voice acting, which is understandable. What's a little more sad is that the plot, setting, and characters are quite forgettable. Even as someone who really cares about the story, it was hard for me to be invested in this one. I honestly have no idea what the premise is at all. This would normally be a nail in the coffin for most types of games I play, but for a roguelike deck builder, it feels less important. Still, the game's attempt at a story sort of makes me wish that there really was one. At time of recording, a little over 2 months after release, it's still a little early to be talking about sales numbers, but there are already over 2,300 reviews with an overwhelmingly positive rating on Steam. Overall, I'm going to assign the game 4 stars for its cultural value. StarVaders has very little negative content. There is no sex, there is no drugs, there is no alcohol, there is no crude language. There's very little in the way of graphic violence. Most violence is cartoonish mech versus alien fantasy violence. As far as positive content, there's not much of that either, but there is some slight positive content. ESRB rates it E for everyone, which I think makes perfect sense. As far as the message is concerned, there really isn't any, and as a result, there will be no biblical themes video for this game. Overall, I'm going to give the game 3 stars for spiritual value. As far as cost is concerned, StarVaders is good but not great. For the time poor, it took me about 13 hours to reach the true ending with 1 pilot. For the time rich, it took me about 30 hours to be able to beat the game with all pilots. In addition to the regular campaign, there are daily challenges with special rules and seeds, as well as additional challenges you can take on to make the game harder. There are also a number of achievements that I have not yet completed, and this review was recorded around 3 months after release, but the developers already plan on releasing additional content in the coming months. StarVaders retails for $24.99 USD, which I feel is a bit high but still pretty good value. Overall, based on the content value, narrative accessibility, and asking price, I'm going to give the game 4 stars for cost. StarVaders is a stellar tactical roguelike deck builder, taking the successful gameplay of previous big hits and combining them into something new that is quite brilliant. With so many roguelikes and tactical games being made nowadays, it can be hard to really stand out. However, StarVaders really shines by creating compelling gameplay that maximizes the fun while minimizing the frustrating aspects. Based on the criteria discussed in the video, I subjectively assign StarVaders the rating of genre gem. That's all I have for you in this video. Bless you guys. Thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it. If this video blessed you in some way, please consider watching some of my other videos, subscribing, or sharing with me some of your thoughts in the comments below.